Hello and welcome to Designing the User Interface. This is section 2 in our tutorial, and in this particular section we're going to talk about the user interface. Now, as an iOS developer, we have to understand how do we actually design the user interface in an iOS application. So without further ado, let's move ahead with the first design pattern, which is the Model View Controller. In short, we call it the MVC Design Pattern. This particular pattern has been in place since many years. In fact, Apple has been using it for decades, kind of, because this is one of the most common design patterns used out there even today for almost all of the iOS applications. Now, of course, there are a lot of other options. For example, the singleton design pattern, the view model design pattern, and the Viper that is quite famous these days, which is view, interactor, presenter, entity, and router. So these are just a set of words, but you'll get to know more about them when you get into the detailed explanation of design patterns. But for the purpose of this course, to keep it simple, we're only going to talk about the Model View Controller, and I'm going to give you a gist of MVVM, which is Model View View Model. So first, let's have a look at Model View Controller. And as the diagram suggests over here, we have three particular entities, right? One, we have the view, the controller, and the model. Now, the view is quite simple to understand. It's the UI view or any element of the UI kit, which we're going to talk about soon. And it's put on a UI view, basically, which is serving as the view. And when the user taps that button, for instance, a UI button, the user action is recorded and sent to the controller, which in most cases is a UI view controller. And then that controller in turn runs the business logic, and let's say you tap a sign up button. So you are passing all the data like username, email address, and things like that, and put them into a model object, let's say a user object. Now, once you put all of that data that is updated over here, as you can see in the model, it will notify the controller back that the update has been done or whatever happened. Maybe the user already exists, the username is not valid, things like that. And all these things are then sent to the controller, which then updates the view. If the signup is completed, for example, the view will get updated saying the signup is successful. So you can see this is a quite simple to understand life cycle of events over here, as it moves from the user action to the updating of model and then updating the view back. So don't worry about it. It's quite simple to understand. And now that we know the very basic design pattern in iOS, let's have a look at another one, which is also very famous, which is called Model View View Model. In short, we call it MVVM. So basically what happens is if you keep a lot of logic in view controllers, they start getting heavy. Nobody likes thousands of lines of code in a single file. It's very hard to go through the file, and sometimes even hard to debug. It's not easy to locate your functions or whatever you're looking for. So to simplify the logic and to simplify the whole process of interaction and keep things separate, what we have come up with is Model View View Model. So as you can see, we still have the previous three components, which was the model, the view, and the controller, but we have an additional component called View Model. So basically what we are doing is we are adding an additional layer that works between the model and the view directly. So there are certain things which can flow directly use the view model. It doesn't have to go through the controller all the time. And there are certain things that the view model can configure in the view directly without having to go through the controller. Now, of course, there are callbacks and delegates being sent to the controller, which has complete ownership of the view. So the view controller still owns the view, but there are certain things that you can directly use and configure with the view model. And in turn, the view controller can move certain logic like updating of the model and interacting with the model. So there is certain business logic sometimes which can now be put into the view model. Earlier, all this logic was to be kept inside the view controller itself, which is kind of confusing for some users because the view controller is only supposed to control the view. But in turn, it was actually containing code which controls the model. So now the view model is the one who owns the model, controls the model, and observes the model. So all this functionality is quite separated. So as you can see, there's a bit of a difference, and you might get more to learn about this in future. But for now, let's focus on the simple one, Model View Controller, shall we? Let's go to the Xcode demo. Once you open Xcode, you will get three options on the left. And you can click on the second option, create a new Xcode project. Then again, there are a lot of options. I think we already covered that in the first video. So we're going to cover the single view app. And let's give it a product name called Swift 5. And you can choose any theme based on the developer that you are or the enterprise account if you have. You should have a free developer account anyways, and you can select the organization name, whatever, and you could keep the unit and UI tests. Let's go ahead and create a project. I will put it on my desktop. As you can see, it came right over here. All right. So now that we have an Xcode project, let's have a look at MVC pattern. So as you can see, this is the view controller file. As you expected, it is the controller. Then for the view, in this case, is a UI view controller, right? And if you go over here, you can go to the main.storyboard file, which again is connected with the view controller. As you can see, this is a view which is connected to the view controller. And you can see over here, the class is view controller, and there's a small arrow on the right. If you click on the arrow, you go to this class. So what's happening is that this controller is already connected to the view. All we have to do is create a new file by clicking Command N. Then we can select an empty file. For now, oh, that's a user interface. So let's select a Swift file and click Next. You can use the default folder for now and create. So now you could create a model over here, like let's say a user, and in which you could define something like username. You could define something like email and things like that. So you could create a user object, and once you put the user object, of course the class needs an initializer. For now, let's just keep empty strings to avoid the initializer, and it will use the default initializer. Make sure you give a space when you use the equal sign. All right, so let's say you have the user object, and that's basically your model. So instead of calling it file, you should call it user, right? And then you have the view controller, the view, and the model. So if you put it like that, and we can see the three layers over here. So I hope that's basic introduction to the model view controller to you, and you have some confidence of working with these.